Benjamin, if you had a year left to live, what would you do and why?
Oh, okay. Um,
Welcome, Benjamin. Welcome to the Unscripted Room. Here's where we interview a bunch of creators, builders, and people from all lines of industry about the deeper whys behind their work. Welcome. Could you briefly introduce yourself and tell us what you're working on right now?
sure. No, thank you for having me, Marvin. This is an exciting endeavor to figure ourselves out vis-a-vis other people and their careers. So I'll give you a little bit of background on mine, and please cut me off if it gets too long. But
Hmm.
I went to Columbia to study social administration. So that is the administration track at the School of Social Work. And I also minored over at the School of Business. And I realize it's very rare to toggle those two schools, but I thought it was important to get the skills. What I was not expecting was a broad perspective, but that's another podcast. I came out of grad school, went into a nonprofit, and we talked a lot and we talked some more and we kept talking. And I realized about myself that I'm much more results oriented. So my next
Mm.
step was to jump into an e commerce startup. It was 30 people. We double in size and in revenues every year for 3 years. Eventually got acquired by First Data Corporation. My job fundamentally changed about every year. So three really different jobs while I was there. And I just
Hmm.
became enamored with startups. I thought this is amazing. You have to think about what you're doing. You have to do a little bit of planning, but basically you have to get out there, try something. And if it works, great. You move on to the next challenge. If it doesn't work,
Mm.
you keep revisiting it until you make it happen. Then 6 years ago, I decided that rather than do this for others, I would do it on my own. And we can talk a little bit later about the trade offs between running your own business and having clients versus working full time. And
Hmm.
what I'm doing now, I consider it a three-legged stool. So I work directly with startups once they've gotten product market fit or maybe service market fit and they're ready to scale. I help them to look holistically across the business and think about ways to prioritize all their different issues and opportunities and really optimize those opportunities and minimize those risks in a way that
Mm.
helps them move forward as quickly as possible. The second leg of the stool is writing. So I've written two books for founders. One is about scaling your business, and more recently, it's for introverted founders. There are a lot of extroverted role models out there. They do a lot of podcasts like this. They do
Hmm.
conferences. They're very loud and animated at parties, and that's totally fine. But the introverts don't have someone to look to necessarily, and we can talk more about that as well. And then the third thing I do is events. So I'm part of a CFO group, which I joined 10 years ago. I manage events for that. And I'm also part of an early stage startup group, which I became co organizer a couple years ago. And finally, the throughput between all three areas community organizing, writing, and working directly with startups is that it's my thesis that founders don't know what they don't know. And so they might
Mm.
be incredibly smart, highly motivated, and very innovative. And in fact, most founders are, but that doesn't mean they know everything about everything. And so I feel like it's important to expose them to new ideas, opportunities, ways of solving things. And so I'll do that talking to them directly, writing down my ideas, and bringing events where they can meet their peers and learn from experts. And that way they're able to look around corners a lot better.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that you started off in social work in Colombia, or I guess that's what you studied, and you said you later on pivoted directly into NGO. Oh, I guess you went directly into NGO, but then pivoted into startups. I'm curious why exactly you decided to make that transition because I feel like it's quite two different worlds, like you said.
Yes. So I'll do this by way of example. So when I was at the nonprofit, we had a great mission, great people on the team, but we knew that we had to start charging employees a significant amount for health insurance. And
Mm.
we took a lot of time thinking about what plans to offer, but the bottom line was they were going to have to spend a lot more. So I did some research. I found some supplemental benefits where employees would actually save a lot of money. Things that are commonplace now, like flexible spending accounts and transit checks, which you could get on a pre-tax basis. And in that way, you're basically essentially saving 40% on the cost of those items because you're getting it before you're taxed versus after you're taxed. And I said, hey,
Mm,
like I can roll these out right now. I know we're still talking about the health insurance and how that's going to work, but I can save people money today. And it's not going to
mm,
cost the organization anything. The taxes essentially offset the company's match on Social Security and Medicare. And they said, no, we have to wait. And I said, why? And they said,
mm.
well, we have to roll this out holistically. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense. Once again, I could save people money right away. And
Right,
people in nonprofits are not making a lot of money. So if I could save them a couple $100 a month, everybody wins. And we could say, okay, we're
right.
going to do this now. And later you're going to have to pay a lot for health insurance, but recognize they are connected. And the leadership would not buy into it. And it just drove me crazy. I'm like, I want to
Yeah.
save people money. So that's an example of how the organization was very process oriented and I
Mm,
was very results oriented. I wanted to do things.
mm,
Fun epilogue. My first startup job after that, 1 month into the job, I rolled out all those programs I researched and
mm,
just talked to you about.
mm. Yeah, I want to touch a little bit about like you talked about like these different types of almost like distribution channels. You talked
Yeah.
about, you have this company that essentially you're coaching a lot of different founders, and you have your LinkedIn where you kind of draw in a lot of more founders. And then you have your last piece, which is the community part, which is also targeted towards founders. Is there a specific reason why you chose to have so many channels? Because I know a common advice is to only focus on one channel and learn how to scale it well. Is there a specific reason why you decided to choose all three and like kind of expand in all three different ways?
Yeah, so it's tempting to give you an answer that makes it sound like I'm really smart and thoughtful. But
Sure.
I promise I'd be very genuine with you. The answer is that I'm running a bunch of experiments. And
Mm,
so when I started writing, it was because of COVID. It was not my intention to write a couple books, but I first
mm,
started writing pieces for LinkedIn, and they were pretty
yeah.
horrible. But the more I wrote and the more I got some feedback, and the more I realized there are ways to improve upon it, I'd like to think that my writing's gotten better. And a
Yeah.
couple years ago, I was fixated on this idea of here's AI and here are startups, and over there is the idea of humanity, and I'm part of Team Human. And how do those three areas how are they going to reconcile in the near future? And so that was
Mm,
my first event. Uh, Startups, AI, humanity, and how they all come together. And I was lucky to bring in four experts, and I got to ask them questions. And similar to
mm,
you, kicking off your career in podcasting, I was able to bring in people I wanted to talk to and ask questions. And I was like, oh,
mm.
this is actually pretty interesting. And even
Yeah.
though I'm an introvert, I don't mind organizing events where I pick the topic, I picked the panelists, I curate the audience, and I really focus on how are we going to spend some time learning and some time connecting so that my fellow introverts and my fellow extroverts will all get something out of the experience. So, my long answer at this point is that all these things are areas of interest, and I keep
Mm.
refining it so that it's more interesting and less miserable.
Yeah. That's fair. That's super fair. I think when you say these different things and like you trying to experiment, like I think it really is something I'm really curious about because it seems like all these different distribution channels require different skill sets. For LinkedIn, it's probably more writing primarily driven. For community building, like you said, even as an introvert, you still have to do all these outreach efforts. You have to talk to people, and you have to probably practice a little bit of public speaking too along the way.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, what's been your biggest learning in terms of, I guess, if you want to speak on one or two in specific, like LinkedIn or community building, what are some of the biggest skills you think you've developed throughout these, or I guess some of the biggest insights you've gained through trying these different experiments repetitively?
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples. With the writing, I used to write from conception to publication pretty much on my own. With the
Mm,
first book, I did hire a couple editors and I got their feedback, and that was great. But largely, the writing was on my own. And then for my last book, I realized that's probably not a good idea. People have a lot of ideas, and when they look at something, they're not looking at it the same way as me. So I
yeah.
gave my book to a lot of people for proofreading, copy editing, and I got so much useful feedback. I
Mm,
was almost embarrassed to remember that people can really help us as long as we ask. And
mm,
so that was a learning or a relearning in my life, that a solitary activity actually really benefits from crowdsourcing. And then a completely different example with the events, the groups that I manage are free to join, the events are free to attend, and we rely
mm,
on the generosity of sponsors in order to do these events. And so in 2024, I was doing one event a quarter. Last year, I was doing about one event a month. And this year, I was like, oh, I could, if I do three events a month, then I'll make three times as much, right? Like that's simple math.
mm.
Makes a lot of sense. So I started
Yep.
doing all these events in Q1, and I realized that I was making less than Q4 of last year. The reason being is that I was overextending myself. I wasn't reaching out to sponsors the same way. I wasn't
Mm,
focused on this event or that event. I was like, you should sponsor all these events. And the sponsors are
yeah.
like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So my learning has come back to very specific, especially on cold outreach. This is our group. This is what we're trying to do. This is our event. Would you be interested in talking about it? And all that in two sentences, because people are
Mm,
inundated by messaging. And so if I can make my point crisp and clear and verify who I am, then a lot of times people, not a lot of times, but more often than not, people will say, "Oh yeah, tell me more. I want to hear what you're doing." And that's a learning to go from, a lot of information to hyper focus. Now, if I was a politician, I would have learned that a lot sooner, but here I am, a businessman coming to that lesson.
I wanted to get a sense of how it's like to be in your position because you talk about like you're doing all three things. And so could you walk me through sort of the typical day in the life of Benjamin, how that would look like, managing all these different channels? Is there like a typical day in your life, or does this vary a lot day by day throughout the week?
So I suppose if I take all the days over a long period of time, there are averages, and so I'll
Mm,
try to speak in those terms. Um, so in a typical, let's call it a typical week, on the consulting side, I'll talk with clients, I'll check in, I'll be part of meetings, part of discussions. I might actively help them with business development or planning events, or a scaling question. Or it might be more like, hey, I saw this idea, we should talk about it. Maybe there's an application from this industry to your industry, making those connections. So I'll have those discussions. It would be like working for a company anywhere from a couple hours a month to 15 hours a week. So if you
mhm,
imagine that part of it, the event planning, depending on how close or far we are from an event, it will be organizing the event. So I'll come up with the topic. I'll try to find I'll find the panelists. Then I'll reach out to sponsors and say, hey, we're doing this event. These are the people involved. This is, a good reason for you to support it because, and I'll fill in the
mm,
blank for them. Then I'll start to do promotion for the event, bring in a lot of people. I'll find a space. I'll find some people to help me put on the event. As we get closer, I'll do more promotion. I'll make sure that the panelists are clear on what to expect. So we'll do a pre-meeting, and then we'll run the event. And every time I'll learn something.
mm.
And then for the writing, if it's the weekly writing, then I'll spend time on Saturdays. That's my day to focus on marketing and branding. And so I'll spend a
Uh,
few hours writing for my weekly newsletter and my 5 daily LinkedIn posts. I have a quasi schedule where I think on LinkedIn every day, this is sort of the theme that I want to work towards. But if something
yep.
interesting comes up, I'll write about it. If I have an event coming up, I'll promote that. and that'll be part of my cadence. When I'm working on a book, it's one weekend a month. Well, it's actually more like
Mm,
3 or 4 days a month where I will
yeah.
sequester myself at a hotel and just
Mm,
focus on writing the book. I'll pick my head up every now and then to check my messages, but I'll immerse myself in the book. And that process, the first book took 3 years, but the second book was a year. The writing, the editing, the design, the promotion. Imagine all those hours going into it. I'm not working on a book now, thankfully.
Segueing into your book, we could talk a little bit about your book, Introverted Founders. I feel like this is something that, like you said, like I think not a lot of people put focus on, and I think just nowadays, like if you look on social media, everyone you see that are publicly posting tend to be extroverts. I think it's becoming a little easier for introverts too, with a lot more forms of content that could be publicized. But yeah, I'm curious. I guess you mentioned that you're an introvert yourself, but what's the bigger motivation behind having this? And I guess what's the bigger goal or bigger vision you have with this book in terms of helping introverts in the startup space, or maybe not even the startup space?
Yes, no, no, totally. I think a lot of the lessons from the book are transferable outside of startups. But for
Mm,
startups in particular, I was really curious to understand if you have this personality trait and if it's not necessarily conducive to sales, networking, fundraising,
mm,
how can an introverted founder find their way through? They have the same goals as their extroverted, co-founder or, a member of the team, but how can they find their way through and be successful? And the more I researched, the more I was excited to find that not only can introverts handle these, aspects, but also they do very well a lot of times. So for example, one
mm.
might think that an introvert was not particularly good at sales. That sales is a process where you go out, you meet a lot of people, you talk to a bunch of people, you're talking about your product, your business all the time. But in fact,
Mm,
introverts can kill it as long as they understand how to manage their energy. So introverts might do meetings one on one versus groups. They might go to
mm,
conferences or events, really research who's going to be there and try to single them out for, 10-minute conversation for the purpose of later having a coffee or a meeting, maybe later in the week or the next week. Introverts are really good at preparing their information so they can rehearse and practice so that when they're talking with somebody, even though they might be nervous, because they
mm.
practice so much what they're going to say, they can meet the other person where they're at and really listen to what are their, hopes, fears, concerns, interests, and speak to those in a very genuine way. And to be super clear, Marvin, I'm not saying that extroverts can't do any of this, but I'm saying
Yeah.
that introverts are well poised to do some of those things. And the final aspect is follow up. It's tempting to have the
Mm,
conversation and then move on to the next conversation. But introverts can be very good at following up because they like to
mm.
write, they like to stay in touch. And so they can send that email, they can send a personal newsletter, which I encourage you and all your, listeners, once a month, once a quarter, reach out to all the people and say, this is what I've been doing. This is where
Mm.
my career's headed. This is what I'm doing for fun. It's just a nice way to keep in touch with people because that just gets harder and harder as we get older.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
introverts can do that writing very easily and they send it out to many people. It's almost the same as going to a room and talking to a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think yeah, there's almost that self-selecting bias when you talk to people for advice. I think I also do that a lot, and you just tend to talk to a lot of more extroverts because they're more, I guess, in a sense, I feel like they're more vocal with their opinions, and hence that's sort of things you take in more. So I think that's really good advice. I wanted you
I
to
agree with that.
maybe,
And I don't want to
uh-huh.
interrupt you, but can I build
Yeah,
on
go
that
for
for a
it.
second?
Of course. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I agree with everything you said. And a lot of people give you advice based on their own dreams and fears. And so when they say you should do this, you
Mm,
should do that, don't do this, don't do that, they are
mm,
basically revealing themselves probably more than they are meeting you where you're at. So to be
mm,
clear, they're trying to be helpful, but they might unconsciously be projecting their hopes and fears onto you as they're giving advice. that advice might be very sound, but it might also represent something that happened to them when they were a child. And now they're telling
Mm,
you, you should do this. Be very mindful of where you're at and take that advice in the context that it's given, that it's coming from somebody who might unconsciously be trying to help you based on their own hopes and fears. AI has nearly
mm,
all the information in the world. And so it's
mm,
incredibly tempting to put questions into AI without
mm,
thinking it through too much. But really, the best prompts for AI are ones where you draft the question, you think about the audience, the desired outcome, any other factors going on, and then you say, AI, help me to think this through. You'll get an
mm.
answer much more relevant to you. In the same way, these people might come up to you, like you said, Marvin, and they're successful, and they seem very confident, and they're very animated, and they're telling you what you should do, but maybe that
Yeah.
wasn't your question at all. They're answering a
Mm.
different prompt. So it's important to keep in mind what you really want and the questions you want to answer for yourself.
I wanted to transition a little bit about into you specifically. Why you decided to pursue, I guess, this line of work. Your deeper reasons for why you chose all of this.
As I think about myself, potentially too much, but I do try to recognize where I'm at and where I sit in the world. I realize
Mm,
that the things that excite me very much, like I can feel my heart racing, collaboration, learning, and organizing are among them. And so Build,
mm,
Scale, Grow really gives me the opportunity to do those while mitigating the risk of working not working for one company, but spreading that risk over multiple clients. I'm also able to learn more by working with multiple companies because one company might be doing something that I can then extrapolate and bring to another client. And so
mm,
the company really satisfies the fundamental skills that I find really interesting. And I could do those in a full-time job, but most full-time jobs plateau at some point. You kind
mm.
of do everything really well, and the rest of the company needs to catch up, and then the company jumps ahead, and then there's more to do. But it's a sort of ebb and flow, at least in my work, business operations and finance. It sort of cycled through these ebbs and flows. But if I'm working with
Yeah.
multiple clients, there's always something to work on. So that's really how I got into this.
The personal part of it. So you mentioned how this your company brings you fulfillment in terms of all these areas, collaboration, personal growth, and all of that. What about yourself? Like, what makes you so interested in this space, like AI, humanity, like all of these bigger ideas that doesn't just merely touch on, the traditional idea of like, oh, I want to scale a business, I want to scale, I want to just maximize, my revenue. Like, what makes you think that? Or I guess what makes it is so important to you, specifically these problems?
Right. Yes. A good question. So I think with AI, there were two things that I was struggling with, and I'm sure a lot of other people
Hmm.
are as well. One is this idea that AI is so incredible that it's going to change everything, and everybody's going to be out of a job, and the world will be
Mm,
different. And the other part is, if people become completely immersed in AI, what happens to the humanities side of the equation? Because last time I checked, I'm on team humanity, not team, robot.
yeah.
So I was struggling with those two. And I really
Mm,
looked a lot to history to put things in context. So one thing is the idea of existential crisis. It sort of
yep.
comes and goes, AI is going to be the doom of us all. We don't stand a chance. uh, every generation has its existential crisis, whether it's coming off of 9/11, whether it's the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, World War II, World War I, pandemics, keep going, keep going. Every generation has this, oh my gosh, we could all die moments. And while
Mm,
World War II, it's pretty concrete. A lot of people did die, and a lot more could
yeah.
have. Cuban Missile Crisis, thankfully, not a lot of people died, but a lot of people in this country went to sleep thinking they might not wake up tomorrow. And it was very real. I mean, people literally thought like the world will be over with these
Mm.
missiles, close enough to destroy half the country. And so every generation has this existential crisis. Now, that doesn't guarantee that we'll all get through this existential crisis, but we could
Mm.
also, get hit by an asteroid. There could be some sort of, volatile earthquake. You or I could
Yeah.
be in a car accident, and it doesn't matter about the rest of the world because we're not here to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I
Mm.
was like, okay, in context, this is a scary time, but that uncertainty needs to be called what it is. It's uncertainty. People don't know it's the end of the world. They're uncertain. We know we're uncertain. We can all agree on that. Well,
Yeah.
uncertainty doesn't mean dire consequences. It means I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so once I'm able to give it a name and look at the uncertainty, I'm like, okay, yes, the world is uncertain, but is it really that much more uncertain than 10 years ago when, again, I could have gotten hit by a car or I didn't know what my career was doing, or 20 years ago when I fell out of love and like I thought the world was
Mm.
over and I was uncertain, will I ever, find somebody again? Like that uncertainty always exists. It's just if
Yeah.
things are going okay, you and I don't sit and go, well, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we never really know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's just
Mm.
there are certain times when we think about it more than other times. So that's part of it, the existential dread. Now, the job loss is really interesting. Like, I have two
Mm.
daughters, one's 20, one's 16. They're coming into the market. Certainly, it's probably a concern among your peer group as well. Like, wait, what's
Yep.
going on? Are we all going to be out of jobs? Are we not going to have good jobs? And so, there again, I went to history, and I have to tell you the story of the automated teller machine. Do you know
Mm.
that the history of the ATM? So I'll start and then I'll ask you a question, trivia question.
Sure.
Okay, so ATMs were invented in the late 60s. By the early 70s, they start to be rolled out by banks. And
Hmm.
anyone who we thought was an expert, smart in business, a banking leader, all these people would have said the automated teller machine is the death knell for the job of teller. There will no longer
Mm.
be tellers. Tellers are out of
Yep.
a job. If you're a teller, good luck. You'll be out of a job. 20
Yeah.
years later, we actually had more bank tellers in the early
Hmm.
90s than in the early 70s, even though ATMs were introduced widely at that point. Marvin, do you know why we had more tellers 20 years later, despite everyone predicting the end of that job?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I would be very embarrassed that I would get this wrong because I think I just recently heard about this story or someone
Okay.
someone told me about it. But I think I can't give like a very concrete answer, but I think it has something to do with these introductions that enabled people to just like find like reach more retail customers. I'm not sure through what mechanism. Maybe you could touch more about keep going.
Yes, yes. So you got it right. You combine the two factors, though. So let me separate them out.
Mm.
One is with ATMs, opening a bank branch became a lot cheaper. And
Yeah.
that way they could open many more bank branches. So even though an
Mm.
individual branch will have fewer tellers, many more
Mm.
branches with a few tellers generated more teller jobs than in the past. And so there's all
Mm.
these tellers out there. The second thing is that bank tellers can now go from counting money, which is not a particularly interesting job, to helping people plan their retirement and save money for their kids' college and
Right.
get a mortgage for their house. All of a sudden,
Mm.
these really engaging capacities, which I would not want to go to a machine and say, help me think about how I'm going to save for my retirement, right? I want a
Yeah.
person to hold my hand, lay out the options, tell me what other people are doing. Maybe I'll, have an hour long conversation about it because this is my life. And so these bank tellers went from counting cash to helping people plan some of the most important events of their lives. Their job got incredibly interesting and they became more valuable.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good example, I think, of why I guess we shouldn't necessarily be so afraid of AI. Like there's in this day and age, there's probably still a lot of opportunities that we go into. I think you were when you were mentioning the idea of like this as existential dread, I recall this. this podcast I was actually listening the other day by Oprah, and I think she was interviewing this the CEO of Anthropic, and he was talking about how there's like a 30% chance that we're all going to be gone by the end of, I don't know what the exact figures is, don't quote me on it, but something around that mark. But he said that actually gives you all the more reason just to pursue this, to have a chance of getting it right. And I think you kind of touched on a little bit about how we could still have hope almost in the midst of all of this. I think that's really interesting. Um, yeah, I
And
guess
just,
to
I want
yeah.
to be clear too. I don't want to be Pollyannish and say everything will be
Mm,
fine. There's going to be a lot of struggle as we figure out how to reposition ourselves. I think it's particularly difficult for some college students who until recently were very clear on their career path. I
mm,
take this major, then maybe I go to grad school, then I get this internship and then this job. And I know basically if
mm,
I want, I know how the next 50 years could play out. And that is all up in the air. And that's very difficult. Like, I don't want to pretend that uncertainty is easy, even if I can name it. And even if I
mm,
know what my fear is, doesn't make it easy, makes it a little easier, but not a lot. The next few years could be very difficult. I think part of the solution is really thinking in generalist terms. So people who are
mm,
able to straddle across multiple roles, people who can make connections between different industries or different jobs, such that when you go into a job and then they say, oh, could you also do this? Can you take on this project? Can you do this as well? It's the same as the bank tellers who are willing and able to go from counting money to helping people with their retirement planning, their college savings, getting a mortgage. Those are not the same
mm,
skill sets. Those people had to be trained. When you're in college, you can't necessarily get trained, but you can say, oh,
mm,
I'm going to take a class in public policy and a class in science and a class in this and a class in that. Really opens your mind to the possibilities and to start making
mm.
connections. I think the generalists, for the first time in history, the generalists are going to dominate and the specialists are going to be like, okay, well, I'm holding the hand of AI, but the generalists are going to be doing more original thinking as they're making
Mm.
connections. That's my prediction. It's a little more fun than
Yeah,
30% of humanity dying, but
yeah. Yeah,
we'll
no,
see who's right.
that certainly is a more positive outlook. I guess what would your advice be to some of these people who perhaps aren't super sure what they want to do, or are sure but are relatively sure but don't have the guts to do it?
Okay, sure. So I think the answer could actually be the same for both categories. We're never
Mm,
going to know perfectly how our lives could play out. We don't know ourselves that well yet. I'm a little bit older. I'm still learning about myself. I expect
mm,
somebody who's going into or coming out of college has a lot to learn about themselves. Also, we evolve over time. So something that excites you in your 20s might be annoying by the time you get to your 40s. And so my advice is think about it a little and then start it as soon as you can. And
mm,
that goes back to my first job where we kept talking and not doing. And then I landed my second
mm.
job, which is a lot more action oriented. Now, that could be very daunting to take this complete action that I don't know what to expect. I don't know what's going to happen. So here's the hedge. The
Mm,
idea is to experiment. So you say, okay, I want to do this in my life or this in my career, but it's incredibly daunting. Figure out a way that you can take one small step towards what you want to do. Maybe that's interview somebody who's doing it now. Maybe that's, taking a couple bucks from your account and making an investment, but not taking
mm.
everything in your account because you're just experimenting. Maybe that's moonlighting. So maybe it's volunteering somewhere for an hour a week just to get inside
Yeah.
the door and see if you like it. If it's an internship, that's a commit, but maybe it's having coffee with somebody who works there and then asking questions like you're doing now, like, tell me about your typical day. Tell me about your best day. Tell me about your worst day. What's it?
Mm,
Tell me, like, when you started working here, what's the difference between what you expected and how it actually worked out? What are some of the discrepancies? because we all have expectations and they're not usually fully met. So you want to ask, in a way that's not judgmental, but what
Mm.
expectations were not met, for better or for worse, from when you started, and then have those kind of conversations. Those are all part of.
The end of our conversation. But Benjamin, if you had a year left to live, what would you do and why?
Oh, okay. Um, I don't want to say like I'm doing it now, because that
Mm.
is largely true, but also doesn't seem to take in the uh, time period aspect, the pressure of literally,
Mm.
365 days. So I
Sure.
think it would be some of what I'm doing now, but I would also spend a lot of time traveling. There's a lot of places
Mm.
I'd want to see, and I feel like now I'd have more than a year. But if that was constrained, I would probably pick a few places where I'd want to go. And then I guess the other aspect is I would do my best to tie off any loose ends. I don't feel like I have a lot
Mm.
of loose ends. I feel like I've
Uh-huh.
tried to live my life a little as if I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I know there's an extreme version of that where you get super caught up in like it could be tomorrow. I don't want to do that either, but I do kind of think like, oh, like there are people I might never see again or conversations I might
Yeah.
not have because I've seen that happen with some people. So if I notice something really good about something or something I need to
Mm.
talk to them about, then I really try to have those. But I would make sure I don't have any loose ends. And, for my kids, I mentioned earlier, I'd probably give them a little more guidance over time, maybe do a couple
Yeah.
recordings. So, now you're older, here's something to think about kind of. But I don't know
Yeah.
if I would do a ton differently, but that kind of like making sure my relationships were in good order and travel to a bunch of places.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I think a lot of people should think about that more. And me, myself included, is like, like what you said, like if you had a year left, like for a lot of good conversations or a lot of people you find interesting, you should probably shoot that shot and try to ask them that question because you might not have that chance again. And I think it doesn't seem like a principle that a lot of people are living by, but I guess that's something that you gradually internalize as you